You probably already know who Jayne is, but if you don't, he was the head coach for Canada in the most recent World Cup. He now is an assistant coach for the Dallas Fuel for Overwatch League Season 2, and he's most definitely the most renowned Twitch streamer that does educational content. He also has been hosting community events, semi-pro tournaments. He's got a whole bunch of stuff going on over there. I know he wanted to mention that this Saturday they are hosting the first standard format competitive tournament for Tier 2 and Tier 3 teams with Ashe included. Which, keep in mind, Contenders is not playing with the Ashe patch yet, so that'll be interesting. But also, following events beyond this Saturday, he did say that he's going to be putting some of these ideas he's been testing in his pro pugs that we've been telling you about with different rule sets, hero protects, bans, possibly ult charge, things like that. Further events in December and January will test out those formats. Now, before you panic, I want to make it clear, Jayne is not campaigning to put this into the ranked ladder. In fact, he has some perfect ranked solutions that we're going to cover in a follow-up video, but today we're just going to hone in on the hero ban system, keeping in mind that this is only really being floated for team play / pro play. We'll get into a lot of cool examples in the interview, but if you don't know the basic rule set of how these bans work, each team is allowed one hero ban, which disables them from being picked from either side. You may immediately think that reducing the number of heroes that are playable is a bad thing, but if you've watched competitive Overwatch at all, every single patch that has ever come out limits what the top meta picks are and what pro players are frankly even willing to experiment with. So what a single ban effectively does is help vary the gameplay from map to map, and essentially allowing you to take a time warp into a completely different meta if the bans work out appropriately. As the game gets more and more complex, the power creep keeps going up and up and up for certain types of compositions to just overwhelm others. So having the freedom to limit some of that power creep game by game will add variety and will open up for more creative strategy rather than always seeing two teams mirror the same comp, which for many of us is not the viewing experience we want. Let's kick off the interview asking Jayne what he thinks the major effects of this single ban system is.
So the effect with the single ban right now is that any of the very, very strong meta compositions can be completely banned or removed from play. And right now you're having the effect where, for example, if you ban Brigitte and teams who are really, really strong at playing goats, for example, they still want to play compositions that play like the compositions that they themselves have practiced. So even when you see Brigitte get banned or something like that, you're still seeing these quad tank compositions or very, very strange tank heavy compositions that come in. You know, you're seeing Lucio Moira a lot more, kind of going back to the things that we saw a lot back when, you know, it was called Slambulance. So it's one of the really neat things is that you're seeing the compositions more or less that you're familiar with, but a very large number of variations on them, and people are forced to adapt a lot more on the fly. So you're seeing people who are flexible and also understand the game more, having a lot more success in the games that do have hero bans.
So I think the first thing that I remember why maybe some of the devs were kind of against this originally is that, I think I'm even quoting Jeff Kaplan here, maybe paraphrasing it a bit, but we want to see the best players play their best hero. So what would you say against that?
This is very commonly brought up when we discuss this system, that this is the main downside of a hero ban system. Because if you have somebody like Jonak, who is famous for his Zenyatta play, for example, then you want to have him playing Zenyatta. It's fun to watch. You know, you want the best players playing their best heroes, that you have the best Overwatch. But in terms of, you know, skill or talent, ability to actually play the game, a hero ban system favors people who are talented in other ways, in that they can have, you know, their signature pick. And this does happen in, for example, like the League of Legends Worlds. I don't play League of Legends, but as a viewer who still likes watching esports and commentary on it, the Heimerdinger pick during Worlds was known as like a signature pick, and that was banned pretty often, and that individual was still able to flex. But, you know, when they actually did get to pick their signature hero, it became such a big kind of talking point that, oh, wow, they were so cocky, they let, you know, the equivalent of Jonak playing Zenyatta, and it did not go well for them. So it brings in a much more intellectual game, in that players are going to have to think about Overwatch. Right now, when you have just goats being so pervasive, goats is a very, very difficult composition to run at the professional level. There's a lot of micro that needs to be done, and you need to communicate, which is probably one of the hardest things to do in goats. You need to communicate very concisely, very complicated plans. So people and teams are putting a lot of effort into practicing this in one composition, and they're used to playing against other people playing the same compositions or variations thereof. And right now, we kind of have the symptom in the professional Overwatch scene where somebody pulls up something new and it works, and people think it's this brand new revolutionary composition that just going to come out of nowhere, and these people are absolute geniuses. And rather than these teams actually being smart, it's more about their opponents being, well, dumb. So, we have two examples of this, the snoats or the snow goats, where people are kind of playing May with goats, and they're calling this like the new thing. And this has been around in various forms for a very long time. But, the team that ran this May version of goats, for example, replaced their diva with the May. So they didn't have diva, and diva is, of course, like mid 90% pick rate at the pro level, and it's that sort of pick rate for a reason. So you're playing goats without a diva, and you don't have the opponent swapping to a composition that can actually take advantage of that, like a double projectile against goats without a diva. Oh my goodness. That is as hard a counter as you can counter. Then there was the match in Australian Contenders, in which a team had a great amount of success on the first point of Dorado, playing an Ana, Zenyatta, Hanzo backline, along with Winston and Orisa. So you're having things that would be, at least at the highest level, if teams were much more open to improvisation, that's a composition that is extremely weak to a coordinated dive, but you're not having these teams playing these dives in order to counter them. They're so used to playing the meta. When anything non-meta shows up, it works just because people are not familiar with playing against it. There is no emphasis right now on the players to think beyond what they have practiced in scrim. So you're not seeing these intellectual outplays or really seeing the brilliance of some of the high-level players. The amount of opportunities for a good shot caller to recognize a counter, or one individual on the team to see an opportunity for a unique off-meta pick in order to counter this because their normal plans were adjusted or the opponent had to kind of compromise because of a hero ban. It introduces just an extra level of meta, which I think just makes the game better. And as a viewer, they did this for World Cup, where for the World Cup, they had absolutely every single map in play. And at the pro level, that leads to much more generic strategies. If you have to prepare for however many maps there are, I don't actually know the exact number. Is it 19 now? But if you need to prepare for all of the maps, you're going to prepare 2 to 3 generic strategies, which have minor variations here and there. You're going to decide which ones you play on the map, or you're going to decide which ones you play based on your opponents. But if you really kind of want to see creative strategies, you kind of have to do what the Overwatch League does with fewer maps. So the problem with fewer maps, however, is that you don't get that same variation. Viewers are always watching the same maps. So you can have this kind of the best of both worlds. You can have a great amount of variation within the viewing experience without kind of boring viewers.
What would you say then to your confidence level, I guess, in this moving forward? If everyone, a good percentage of the competitive community at least, seems to be in agreement that this is sort of necessary if we want to see more diversity, if that is the goal of the game moving forward, especially to save us from this meta right now. If it was in Season 2 of OWL starting, I think that would be a major problem that we would, as viewers mainly, would want changed immediately. So do you think that this is something with the success it's had that Blizzard might look into at least, or play around with?
I think this is going to happen eventually. If this system had been present in Overwatch at release, I think that would have been a very poor idea. We're just coming up now on like the 30th hero. So kind of banning any significant amount of bans, like if you're banning 4 heroes, 6 heroes, you're getting to the point where a potential conflict could arise where you're banning, like you could ban all of the main tanks, for example. But if you ban too many heroes, right now we don't have a large enough variation within the heroes to go for a very large numerical ban. Previously, when we did have a smaller hero pool, banning 2 heroes would make Overwatch unplayable in certain circumstances if you banned the correct 2 heroes. The gameplay, the compositional, like you would be just so forced onto something that doesn't really function as a composition. It would become basically 6-on-6 deathmatch. So that is something that would have been a problem. And you can certainly argue that even at this point in time, that it would still be a problem. However, at some point in time, with Blizzard releasing the heroes at the rate they are releasing them, eventually this is going to become not only a great decision, but a necessary decision in order to keep Overwatch kind of competitive and move it forward as an esport.
Beyond some sort of miracle balancing, which just isn't really feasible or possible. I think we've had a lot of patches that were really great in terms of diversity, but still there would always kind of be the best option. And allowing the players individually to sort of navigate that is going to be a much more interesting set of matches for us at the highest level. Is there certain paths that you think are better or worse? Because I think in this PUG system, because it's more casual, players might not be metagaming it as hard or picking things that maybe are more for fun, or do you disagree with that?
Oh no, we've seen some people take very good use of the experimental ban system, and some people mess it up. You know, some people mess it up really badly, and it's funny. It doesn't turn out well for them, but it gets a good laugh. And then you have other people. You know, one of the other things that we do in PUGs is not only are we doing a ban system, but we also do a draft system. Now, this would not be applicable to pro play, but for example, we had Logix, an Overwatch League player. He drafted 2 flex supports and then banned the opponent's main support, the main of the opponent's main support. So he had a massive advantage in the game when Ana Zenyatta was the most viable of the support compositions left on the field. You do have this metagame and where people are trying to gain a competitive advantage by either doing targeted bans or forcing the opponent into like some sort of mirror match in the way that we're doing this. And I think this is also another big difference between League and Overwatch and how they would do bans, in that in League there's asymmetric bans. Am I right on that? I actually don't know that for 100% sure.
I really like Dota, and I don't know it as well as like a pro or anything, but as far as I know, the draft system there would be you can protect and then you can ban, and then every selection you have is exclusive to you anyway. So if a hero is banned, they're banned for everybody, and regardless. And then any pick you get is also a ban for the other team in a way, right? So like as you thin out the 100 characters or something that you have to work with. So that's, at least in Dota, that I believe that's how it works, if I'm not mistaken.
I just realized that's an assumption on my part. Either way, the long story being that any bans in Overwatch would basically have to be global, because you wouldn't want to get into a situation where the opponent is playing a hero that has a hard counter, but that hard counter is banned and you can't mirror. So that would be a bad situation, in that at the worst case scenario, you can mirror. So that's kind of like always the way to ensure that the game remains in balance, regardless of how badly the pick goes, is ignoring kind of hero pool preference and whatever. As long as you have that mirror available and you're not doing like asymmetric bans, like Team B bans Widowmaker and then runs it themselves, and then whatever reason you needed that Widowmaker in the mirror matchup.
Okay, so I'm going to do my best attempt to try to sell a draft system for Overwatch, because when I hear a person as yourself so invested in the pro community, and the way you're saying that is based on understanding the fact that maps are won and lost by Widowmaker play, and she does so much for certain situations that if you wouldn't have her, it would be a massive disadvantage. But here is my attempt to try to sow the seeds of an eventual draft mode. From what I can tell, at least, most viewers don't prefer mirror matches from watching it, and of course that's not a pro argument, but just a aesthetic one, I guess. And in MOBA games, at least, when a player is the only player on that hero, there's a certain identity that goes along with certain picks. Whereas when everything's mirror matches in Overwatch, it's hard for viewers to understand what's going on to some degree. However, what happens is that there's even a more dramatic effect of the positive things that we were talking about from just a single ban. So whereas I think we all can come to agreement that single ban is like the least damaging way to have the same effect, so it's the easy first step, but theoretically, either now or even when Overwatch has many more heroes, I would like to see a draft system in place, because the same roles that you assume need to be filled, I think if a draft system was made properly, and maybe in respect to, this is how Surefour explained it, which I think is possibly how everyone should try to describe the roles from now on, remembering that there's not 3 roles, there's 6, right?
If only 6, there could be more.
True. Okay. You got me there. And there's maybe like a tech pick or something like that, heroes that go beyond those roles as well, and they fit in different subcategories perhaps. But if you were to say draft a roster of heroes for a team that's like 9 or 10 heroes, then I think at least, and I haven't had this tested, so I'm just speaking into the wind here, but I think you would be able to see the same level of coherence, but still keeping gameplay. And of course, there's all sorts of pitfalls that you come across when you even start thinking down this line. Like you said, can you ban all the tanks? Well, I think no, but if we numerically allow, let's say, in those 6 roles, the proper assortment of picks and bans per those roles, I think we could find ourselves in a place where it would be called exclusive pick, is what it would be, because everyone that has their own pick would you wouldn't be able to mirror.
Yeah, you can do that. And the other thing that you could do is to solve both that problem that you're discussing as well as the problem that we talked earlier about, for example, never ever seeing Jonak on Zenyatta ever again. Beyond the ban system, you could introduce a protect system, or you could limit the number of bans per role. And this is actually one of the main pieces of feedback we have had, in that people are very hesitant to ban 2 heroes from the same role because they think it can really imbalance the game. So that is, like, you could have the only ban 1 hero from each category, whatever you define those categories are, as well as before the ban phase, you can have each team kind of protect, for example, 1 hero that now cannot be banned. So if you do have a specialist who you want to bring in for that role, you can ensure that they are playing that role. And I think that'd be the best of the both worlds. But going back to another previous point you made about mirrors and how I was talking about this mirror as like the fallback, and you said that viewers don't like mirrors, I completely agree with you. Mirrors, especially if they become pervasive or there's only kind of very slight variations of the mirror, you know, for example, Moira goats, Ana goats, and Zenyatta goats. If we have this situation, not super fun to watch, but that's what we have right now. People don't like watching goats. People don't like watching mirror matches, but right now we just have goats mirrors in almost every single game. So worst case, absolute worst case scenario, we have something that is similar to what we have now. However, best case scenario, with these bans, every single team is going to have a slight difference in the heroes that their players can play, the preferences that they want to play, whether they're aggressive, whether they're passive, whether they like to bait and counter, and all of these things. And when you have to improvise on the fly or prepare backup options, every team is going to do that differently. And the amount of mirror matchups that we actually do see in the experimental games that we've been trying, both tournaments and pugs, is that the mirror matchup very, very rarely ever actually occurs.
So like when the universal bans are made across the board, usually both teams are picking different comps out of what's left over. Is that what you mean?
Absolutely.
Okay. Do you have any specific examples of interesting scenarios that happen with different bans? One thing that I thought of as well, what I see a lot of teams do is, for example, ban Brigitte, which makes sense. But let's say if you were more of a dive team, you could do some like 500 IQ ban and ban Lucio, where if you were afraid of Ryan-centered comps, I think Lucio's even farther up the tech tree in terms of necessity for them to work. So they would struggle to run even Slambulance as well.
If you ban Diva, for example, there's teams that will say, well, they don't have a Diva, which means that we can get a lot more value out of Roadhog, or we can replace the Diva with like a Hammond or something. Or if like Brigitte is banned, they want to get rid of goats and go for, you know, a quad tank setup. Whereas other teams will look at a Diva being gone and be like, oh, well, we can play snipers or double hit scan, because there's so many different things that open up when, for example, Diva is removed. And even when we are getting into like the dive matchups, with Hammond being introduced, if you do have these heroes like, Lucio being removed, Lucio being removed doesn't hurt dive as much as you would think. Lucio is actually one of the best heroes in order to help peel and, speed away, back out, stabilize, re-engage the boop. All of this is very, very good at peeling. So, especially if you're being forced onto an Ana Zenyatta, it enters like these really interesting situations where actually offense is greatly favored over defense. So you could have one team or both teams, for example, very aggressively counter diving each other's backlines with no attempt to save their own backline because they know that that's such a large weakness. And it's a rush for who can execute the dive cleaner and faster and kill people before kind of their opponent finishes off their backline. They've killed the opponent's backline. So yeah, there's so many different options that are opened up, and nobody kind of has prepared the perfect answer for that exact map, that exact ban. The amount of options, it comes closer to things like chess and go, where every single game is unique.
Right. I think it ties back perfectly to what you said earlier, where it kind of rewards you from your experience of across the metas, because basically exactly what you just described was Apex Season 3, 4, and maybe even more, right? Like the classic Tracer Genji dive meta, which that's essentially how it was played. So I think being able to change that for each team will be, and also I say this as well as a wannabe analyst, it just opens up so many narratives for like a desk to set up and the casters to see that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You can talk about how well this pick worked, or what was the thought process behind that, or if a pick falls on its face, or if an improvisation doesn't work. You can talk about it and like, what was the decision behind this? Why didn't it work? Was it the right pick, just the wrong execution? The amount of things that you can talk about, the amount of unique situations that you can find yourself in Overwatch, it just becomes an absolute treasure trove of content and armchair analysis and discussion, and I think it would breathe so much life into the game. If anything, people love seeing their favorite players flex and do amazing on heroes that they're not known for. That's really cool. It's fun to talk about. It gives you a new dimension to your favorite player beyond just, yeah, he clicks heads just that little bit better, but he can also do this so much more. But the teams and the players who have experience with the metas going all the way back to kind of beta with no hero limit tournaments, the 2 Lucios, 2 Tracers, 2 Winston sort of meta, each one of the metas as we've gone through time has come with its own lessons, its own tactics, its own macro play. And the players who have that experience, that knowledge, the intellect, the actual kind of Overwatch IQ, if you will have an advantage. It becomes a much more cerebral game, not only with how to play your own game, but how to play your own game to outsmart the opponent.
We're about wrapping up for our time slot, so did you have any last things that you wanted to say or mention about any of the things we covered today?
Oh, no, it's just thanks for the discussion on it. This all started based on the video that Siegel put out, and then the podcast that followed with myself, Siegel, Surefour, and XQC, and myself personal, if I can kind of include a plug here. We're trying to experiment with these new systems. We try and do as many, like a lot of events for the communities, both pickup games and tournaments. So yeah, this Saturday, actually, we're hosting a semi-pro tournament with Tier 2 and Tier 3 teams, and we're considering in the next tournament, not this weekend, because this weekend is the new thing that we're adding this weekend is going to be, it's the first tournament with Ash at the semi-pro level. But then after this, going into December and January, we're going to be starting to experiment with tournaments that have these rules, like ban systems, like, protect systems, and just see what it really does to the game. We're not gonna wait for Blizzard to implement tournaments to see how they work. We're putting up the prize money, we're inviting the teams, and we're like, what would Overwatch look like if we did this? So this is just the start of the conversation. Blizzard isn't going to do this tomorrow, next week, next month. Don't expect them to. Let's make sure that it's something that would be as good as we hope it is. And then once we've kind of like shown that this is awesome, then we can kind of be like, Blizzard, now is time.